As we enter into the gospel today, there's two stories of the spirit being cast out and this guy that is healed. And when Jesus heals the guy in the second part of the story, he says, "Be opened," which implies that there was something about his being. And I think it's more than just that he couldn't hear and couldn't talk, that he had a speech impediment. I think that there was a way that he was closed off from people around him, so that this "be opened" was an invitation for his whole life to be changed. There was something that was closed. Similarly, in the first story, this woman who is not a Jewish person, that would have been one of Jesus's ethnic group, right? Not from his hometown. He's often a different part of the community. And the Syrophoenician woman probably had her own things she believed, and those things had not brought her daughter to a space of healing, and so perhaps with some desperation she comes to Jesus. Also with this desire perhaps for the life of her and her daughter to be opened up in a way. I wonder how often our lives feel closed in. I think about times where we may be boxed in by the bills that we have, or stifled by the suffering that is around us. Sometimes life needs maintenance, right? Our bodies need maintenance, our relationships need maintenance, and we can get stalled out to where that maintenance prevents us from progressing in the ways that we want, and we can feel like we are kind of stuck, boxed in a place. I spent the better part of about 3.5 weeks this summer traveling to visit family in North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, St. Louis. And a good chunk of that journey, we were in very small towns, 900 people, 2,500 people. Even the greater Minot metro area, where I was visiting one of my aunts and uncles, my cousins would refer to traffic that to me here in Orlando wouldn't even seem like there were cars on the road. When we went from one town to another, it was 20 miles, and it took 20 minutes. And I don't know that we saw a whole another car on the way from the one to the other. So eventually we got back to Orlando, and last week we had a reason to be up in Oviedo running some errands, and it was a Saturday. We got on I-4, and before we even got past the mall that's not too far away here, there was a sign that said traffic reduced to 1 lane for construction. And so pretty quickly we were stopped. Now the car was moving, but it was moving so slow that the speedometer still registered 0, and all 4 lanes were just boxed in. And eventually it just kept narrowing down, right, until it was just that 1 lane. And all of that time, there was nowhere to go. And I think that's what it can feel like in life when we feel boxed in, when the circumstances around us, and sometimes it's our own choices, right? Those bills that can make us feel like we're stuck. Sometimes we choose those bills, and maybe we overreach and end up in a position where we feel boxed in, but that box, we may be folded up and put together all on our own. Sometimes the circumstances are beyond us, but all of those ways that it can come and make us feel like we're boxed in, it's like being stuck on the highway with no particular place to escape, and just being stuck, moving along at that pace, just sitting there baking in the sun, wishing you could get where you wanted to go. Sometimes it's not just our circumstances and the things of life that can make us feel boxed in, but our faith. Our own faith sometimes can get stuck and stalled, and maybe we don't understand, or maybe we have doubts, or maybe we're so sure about what we believe that it cuts off the possibility of us being opened up. If you think about this woman that comes before Jesus to ask for healing for her daughter, she certainly believed something, and that something did not bring her to a place of healing. And so she came to Jesus with perhaps a more open mind that left out the being boxed in by what she might have believed to come to this space for healing. But Jesus says something that we don't maybe like Jesus to say, right? It's hard to hear Jesus say rough stuff. He says to her that it's not fair to give the children's food to the dogs. And this is a pretty deep insult. And this is a hard text to wrestle with and to understand what Jesus was trying to get at. Why did he say what he said? I don't always know that answer, right? But for today, I want to just stay with what Jesus says and what he does. And what he says is that the food from the children should not be given to the dogs. So I want us to just for today assume that Jesus believed that he was sent to the children of the house of Israel, and that it was not fair to give his energy and his healing power and all that to somebody that wasn't fit into that group of people that he maybe believed he was sent to serve, right? Because that's what he says, right? So if Jesus is saying that, then what he is saying is something that he believes, and that then creates some boundaries. And maybe just for that moment, he is boxed in by those boundaries. But then he behaves and does something different, right? He responds to her and ultimately casts out these demons. So that what he says and then what he ultimately does, right? The actions are the thing that carry away that healing. Now that tension between what we say and believe and maybe what happens when we are opened up or what happens in our actions is something that has always been there. The other lesson we heard today from James talks about faith without works being dead. As Lutherans, we would say that we are saved by grace through faith, not by works. And so a passage like that one's a little bit tough. I don't think James is saying that our works save us so much as when we are saved and when we have received this gift of grace, it ought to be evident in our lives, right? When Jesus opens up this guy and tells them not to tell anyone, they run out and tell everybody. Their lives have been so impacted by their encounter with Jesus that they can't help but tell other people. But already in the early church, there's this tension between what we believe to be true and how our actions are reflected in that belief. I spent a good bit of my summer reading about and researching the formation of Norwegian Lutheran church bodies in America as Norwegian immigrants came across in the late 19th century. I was super jazzed about that. Maybe not the most riveting reading for everyone. But ultimately, when those first Norwegians came, they created three what we would call denominations. On the one side, there was this group called the Haugian Synod, and they really deeply believed that lay people had all of the gifts necessary to preach, pray, teach. Pastors had a role to play, but the church could be the church even if there wasn't a pastor around. Then on the other side, there was a group that the state pastors from Norway would come to serve the immigrant communities, and they were very much concerned about doctrine, that we believe the right things. Now, I don't want to overstate it. All of them believed that doctrine was important, and all of them believed that lay people had a role to play in the church. But both sides, and the ones in the middle, there was a third group, got sort of boxed in by what they believed. So the group over here would say, if your life does not demonstrate your faith, then you don't really have faith, and you need to have that grace of God go to work on you, and it should be evident in the way you behave. And this group over here would say, what you believe is the most important thing, and that we get our doctrine right. And then the group in the middle would try to make nice, but all of them were so boxed in that they fought about everything. There were theological disputes and disputes about schools and seminaries and who got to control them. All of them stuck in these places in this tension between what we say we believe and how that belief is reflected in our lives. In the stories that we hear today, Jesus says something that we might presume that he believes, but then he's not entirely boxed into that. The woman's interaction with him gets to a place where he says, because you have said this, the demon has left your daughter. The people that bring the other man to him for healing, right? Jesus has this guy in front of him and he says, be opened up. That day that we were stuck on the highway, eventually that one lane got past the road construction that was happening, and then it opens back up. But when it opens back up, because it's been so bottled up, all of the lanes in front of you are completely open, and you can speed up and go as fast as you want in whatever lane you want to go to. That's how I imagine it felt for this guy that Jesus said be opened, right? All of these opportunities opened up before him because of this grace of Jesus that touched his life. Similarly for the woman and her daughter, right? The demon is cast out and then life is opened up. This is the gift that we get from Jesus, right? The death and resurrection of Jesus is what opens up our lives so that we don't have to just be boxed in by our circumstances and our choices and all that happens around us. We don't even have to be boxed in by the very things we believe. And that belief isn't just about theology. It's what we believe about the world and what we believe about politics and what we believe about ourselves. We don't have to be boxed in by those things because Jesus' grace opens us up to be freed to new things that happen in our life. We don't always see that though, right? sometimes we just get stuck in that place of being boxed in. And the faith that we carry is that Jesus never gives up on us, is always coming to us to open us up so that we can experience that gift of grace. So, to go back to James, who says faith without works is dead, what can we do? Well, our works don't save us. Our works are a reflection of the gift that we have been given. And I think Jesus gives us a model for that in the text. He wants to be by himself for a bit. He wants to push back against this woman's request. But ultimately, when he has a person in front of him, a real live human being in need, he responds with healing and grace. When the crowd brings him another person, a real live person, he takes him aside and he responds with healing and grace. And so I think the invitation for us today is, whether we feel boxed in or stifled or slowed down, whatever it is in life, to know that there are always real life people that can end up right in front of us, and that we can respond to them with that very same healing and grace. And in that process, we will be further opened up, they will be opened up, and together all of us will travel in that open grace of God as we go. Amen.